The thought, if you'll let your imagination run for a minute, the thought of standing before Jesus and having him look you straight in the eye, and even speak your name, but to have him say, "Well done, good and faithful servant." I can hardly even think about that without getting weepy about the whole idea. But how terrifying it would be to stand before him and know who you're standing before and have him say, "I don't know you at all." It's time to settle things before you get to the judge, and the judge is God. Now, at the beginning of this message, I mentioned the idea of living in context. Here's the context. The context is we're all going to stand before God in the day of judgment. Every one of us. Every human being. The believer will stand there for reward. The unbeliever will stand there for condemnation. But everybody's going to stand before God. No one gets to escape that. So now, since we know that, since we know because God's Word says it, what are you going to do? That's the context that Jesus is giving His disciples and the world to live in. That's a context that will change your life, or it ought to. If you go back to verse 40 of our text, Jesus says, "Therefore you also be ready." Be ready. Psalm 95, verses 7 and 8, which is quoted in Hebrews chapter 4, verse 7, says, "Today if you hear His voice, do not harden your hearts." Listen to what God is saying to you today. If you've never surrendered your life to Him, today's the day. Don't wait until you're standing before the judge to try to strike a deal, because by then it's too late. Make the deal now. Surrender your life to Christ now. Smart means to accept the free offer of salvation that's found only in Jesus. But Christians also need to pay attention here. Maybe you are a Christian this morning. Maybe you've already been born again by the Spirit. Remember, Jesus is addressing His disciples through most of this discourse. Now, God's Word says in 1 Peter chapter 4, verse 17, "For the time has come for judgment to begin at the house of God." God's going to judge His house, His people, for what we've done and how we've done what we've done. But it goes on further to say, okay, if judgment begins first at the house of God, what will be the end of those who do not obey the gospel of God? The judgment is for everyone, for believer as well as non-believer. So, context. Context for life. Transformation of your heart. You need to be smart in your heart. You need to be wise in your heart. You need to have an undivided heart that's for Jesus only. You need to be responsible with what God has told us to do in His Word. And you need to be prepared in your heart, because sooner or later, every single one of us is going to have to stand.